Manchester remembers. A city known for its noise comes to a deafening halt. Police close in on those linked to the attacker, but say more may be at large. The general election is 2 weeks today. Tonight, that first sense of how Manchester's tragedy may shape the rest of the campaign.
Tomorrow, Jeremy Corbyn will return to the campaign trail with a major speech in which he will appear to draw a direct connection between British foreign policy and terrorist attacks.
But how will campaigning carry on here, and have voters' minds been changed by what's happened?
I never would imagine a bomb in Manchester, not in a big venue like that, anywhere in the whole of this country. And now security, national security is a main issue for me.
Meanwhile, Newsnight has uncovered new details about the background of the bomber.
We have information tonight that Salman Abedi may have fought in Libya in the civil war that ousted Colonel Gaddafi.
We'll be discussing all of this with the former Home Secretary and discussing whether the government's anti-extremism strategy is working.
Good evening from Manchester. Now, it's not often you hear the city go silent. When it does, the effect is overwhelming. At 11 o'clock, they came here to mourn, to mark a moment of silence, and then to try to pick up their lives. The Queen paid her respects to survivors at the Children's Hospital, thanking medical staff on the front line of this tragedy. And the police investigation closed in on those linked to the killer. This week has been a broadly politics-free zone. Tomorrow, all that changes. Jeremy Corbyn will invoke Manchester's tragedy to talk about the connection between foreign policy and terrorism. Now, it's cautiously worded, but unmistakable in its message. So what effect could it have? Nick Watt is on College Green for us. Nick, what's Mr Corbyn saying in that speech?
Yes, as you say, Emily, tomorrow Jeremy Corbyn will directly address the Manchester bombing as the general election campaign resumes. Now, in remarks that are being interpreted in some quarters as drawing a link between recent UK military interventions and the bombing, the leader of the Labour Party will say that many experts have pointed to the connections between wars our government has supported or fought in other countries and terrorism here at home. Now, it is important to bear in mind that Mr Corbyn also says that his remarks in no way reduce the guilt of those who attack our children. And the reason why he's saying all this is that he is setting out how a future Labour government would embark on what he calls an informed understanding of the causes of terrorism. Now, at one level, these remarks are not a surprise. Jeremy Corbyn has opposed all recent military intervention by the UK. But obviously the timing, just 4 days after the Manchester attack, is significant.
That speech comes tomorrow, Nick. What kind of reaction would you expect from it?
Well, I spoke to one Labour candidate in the North West who described these remarks as horrible. This Labour candidate told me this is the wrong moment to politicise these events. But I spoke to another figure in the Labour Party who is no fan of Jeremy Corbyn, and this person said to me, there is some truth in what Jeremy Corbyn is saying.
Nick, just before we move on, there is a new poll out tonight. Now, I understand this was taken before the events here on Monday night, but just tell us what figures it's coming up with.
Well, it's not that long ago that the Conservatives were 15, 18, 20 points ahead in the opinion polls. In a YouGov poll in the Times tomorrow, the Conservative lead is just down to 5 points. 43 to 38%. Now, what you look with polls is a pattern. And the pattern recently has been that the polls have tightened, but not as dramatically as this. So what you'll be looking for is there a pattern in other polls of a dramatic tightening? Why is this happening? Well, it appears that Conservative election manifesto launch didn't go off very well. They had to sort of do a U-turn on one of their big pledges on social care. And interestingly, YouGov had some polling that showed when you asked people what did they think of the main policies of the parties at those manifesto launches, the main ones identified on the Labour part were positive ones. Scrapping university tuition fees and things like that, more money for the NHS. the Conservative main policies identified by voters were negative and controversial ones, the social care one and scrapping free school meals.
Nick, thanks very much. Nick Watt there on College Green. While campaigning for the general election was put on pause this week, but today UKIP launched their manifesto saying it was time for daily life to resume, or it would start to spell victory for the terrorists. But how does Manchester get back to normal? What effect will its tragedy have on people's priorities and on the way that they choose to vote now? I've been talking to candidates here, to voters, and to a mother whose 3 children were all at the bombed concert that night. 3 days on from the terror, you find a city that is, outwardly at least, landing on its feet. Perhaps parents are watching their young that bit more closely. Perhaps you spot armed guards amongst the ice creams. So what does normal really look like when the inconceivable has happened on your doorstep? And will voters think differently about the general election now 2 weeks today?
No, I don't think so. I think my mind was already made up before then, to be honest. No, so it won't be making any difference whatsoever.
No, we won't change any mind, so everything, I think, is stay the same. Manchester will back up, get up and get together.
This pause in campaigning has been recognised by all parties as the appropriate thing to do, and yet arguably it presents more of a problem for the parties of opposition. The Conservative candidate for Maidenhead also happens to be the PM, and at a time of national crisis, the party of government is the one that assumes that role of leadership, the one that looks to be in control. UKIP broke with the pack today, back on the campaign with their manifesto launch. Their candidate here is unrepentant.
I imagine you're referring to the Manchester bomb attack and the issues regarding radical Islamism. UKIP are the only people who are willing to talk about it, the only people who got the courage to raise these issues, to discuss them in public and find a way to improve the situation.
The local fire crew are housed in the Labour HQ of Manchester Withington. Their candidate, the MP before dissolution, says he won't be back campaigning until Monday.
Have you thought yet of the words you're going to use or how you're going to formulate that? Is it going to include reference to what happened here?
We have a very adversarial approach to politics, and that's inevitable in our system. I think at a time when Manchester has come together and been united, it's quite difficult then to resume the adversarial approach. But that's part of our politics, and so I think what we want to do is resume our campaigning in a positive sense, positive manner, and hope that we don't get the kind of slanging matches that sometimes we unfortunately are part of our natural politics.
She didn't want to make it nicely, and she'd had her hair.
You don't have to go far in this neighbourhood to find those who rubbed shoulders with tragedy on Monday night. All 3 of Shinaz's children were at the concert as the bomb hit. But for a chest infection, she explains, she would have been there in the foyer to pick up her girls.
I would have been there waiting for them like the other parents were waiting, and that is a terrifying thought. But, you know, it's just circumstances. I wasn't there, and they were, thank God, they were saved. My children came home safe to me, and many other children didn't come home to their parents, and it's heartbreaking really to think of that.
As it was, her 26-year-old son shepherded his younger sister safely towards the exit, a hero in her eyes.
That might have been the last photo I'd seen. Anyway.
Is that what you think?
Yeah, I do. They came home safely, so I feel like I'm so grateful. But it could have been the last ones, really.
So has it changed her focus as a voter?
Security of the country wasn't really a top priority for me in the past, because this is a very secure country. Britain's one of the safest countries in the world, and especially Manchester. I never would imagine a bomb in Manchester, not in a big venue like that, anywhere in the whole of this country. You know, and now security, national security is a main issue for me. I can't believe that ISIS has come to the streets of Manchester.
The Lib Dems talk about time lost these last few days. Their office is a hive of activity. They recruit them young here. But I'm wondering if a party of civil liberties finds itself at odds with the national mood.
I think civil liberties are a very important issue for a lot of people. I would hope that no political party would try and get some political advantage out of a tragedy like the terrorist incident in Manchester, but actually it focuses people's minds on the important issues, and I think people in this part of Manchester believe that civil liberties are important.
A minute's silence at 11 marks a moment to remember the dead. It ends in applause, releasing a kind of permission to the living to carry on with their lives. Will voters want to hear Manchester's tragedy reflected in the platforms of politicians? Election campaigning resumes nationally tomorrow. It may all be much clearer then.
Well, we did also try to talk to the Conservatives. They weren't available, but there are full lists of all the candidates standing in Greater Manchester's constituencies on the BBC's website. That is it from me and from St Anne's Square tonight. Now, back to Kirsty in the studio.
Thanks very much, Emily. Well, we'll hear more about the investigation into the suspected cell around the bomber in a moment. But first, we heard earlier how Jeremy Corbyn is planning to hit the issues raised by the attack head-on when he returns to the campaign trail tomorrow. We did ask to speak to somebody from the Labour campaign tonight, but nobody was available. But Charles Clarke was Home Secretary at the time of the 7/7 bombings and is with me now. Good evening. Thanks very much for coming in. We'll come on to look more broadly at how we combat terrorism in a moment. But let's just deal, first of all, with Jeremy Corbyn returning to the fray tomorrow morning. You heard there the Labour candidate in Manchester saying that he finds it very difficult to imagine how there's going to be an adversarial approach. This is actually quite adversarial, but Jeremy Corbyn's view, he says, that the war on terror isn't working. Is he right?
I don't think he is right. I mean, I've not taken Jeremy's advice on security matters for some decades now, and I don't with his remarks tomorrow, as if they're correctly reported. He's simply wrong. The core attacks from 9/11 and beforehand have come from forces which are about trying to destroy the whole of our society. This is before the Iraq War, before the wars in Syria, and they're about eliminating the ability of young people to go to an event like they did in the Manchester Arena, eliminating programmes like this to create a society under the caliphate which really removes all our democracies. It's quite different from previous terrorist organisations.
In an excerpt from the speech he's going to make tomorrow, he says, "We will also change what we do abroad. Many experts, including professionals in our intelligence and security services, have pointed the connection between wars our government has supported or fought in other countries and terrorism here at home." I mean, some people would suggest that's right. I suppose you might...
At one level, it's a trivial remark, because it's certainly true that there are networks. Before 7/7, people had travelled around the world. It may be that there's some link with what's been going on in Syria and the individual who's committed this awful atrocity in Manchester. But that's not the motive force. The motive force is about the destruction of all the core elements of our society. And that's not something which is about a foreign policy conflict, something in Syria, something in Iraq, whatever it might be. It's about a totally opposed vision of what society should be.
Well, of course, he has opposed foreign conflicts, which would suggest then that a Labour government would then not support, for example, intervention in Syria, would not support intervention in Libya.
Well, you'd have to ask him on that question. It's been a massive issue of discussion in the Labour Party, and much more widely, of course. And there's a whole set of issues about what are the right circumstances in which support should take place. But you've also got to acknowledge, Kirsty, in this difficult debate, that not getting involved has consequences just as much as getting involved.
Do you think then, given that what you hear he's going to be saying tomorrow, that he is prime ministerial material?
I've never thought he's prime ministerial material. I didn't support him as leader of the Labour Party. I shall be voting Labour in the election. I hope Labour does well, because I think we don't want a Theresa May government with a barren field in front of them. But I can't say with integrity that I believe that Jeremy Corbyn is prime ministerial material.
Well, moving on, and indeed moving back to the time of 7/7, and you were Home Secretary. Now, just before then, you had started to introduce a number of anti-terror measures, one of which was ID cards, which went all the way to royal assent. Then in 2010, Theresa May overturned that.
It was her first act.
Do you believe that had we had ID cards now, we would be in a different position or not?
You can't say that of any of the particular measures. You can't say if only that had been done, this Manchester bombing wouldn't have succeeded. But I do believe it's the job of government to create a climate which makes it more difficult for the terrorist organisations to work. ID cards are one of those things. A good control order regime, which Theresa May also abolished when she came in, is another of those things. A good community policing system with police and community support officers properly funded is another of those things. You've got to do all of these things, but you can't say, if only we'd had ID cards, for example, then this attack wouldn't have happened.
If we look at this particular, the Salman Abedi case, I mean, there seems to be some suggestion that security services over time have missed chances to actually home in on him. I mean, do we have to accept that that is the nature of our anti-terror policing, that some will get through the net?
That's the risk, and that's why we've got the security levels that we have at the moment being talked about. But you can't ignore the importance of resources for our security services, because they have to look at literally thousands of people who might be possible risks. And they have to make judgments, very difficult judgments, about where to prioritise. But the overall background is the resources situation.
Well, the resources, I know that Labour has said, of course, there have been police cuts. But if you take someone like Andy Burnham, speaking from a Manchester perspective, what he would say, and has said, is that actually it's disproportionate now about the police that are in London streets and the police that are in streets of other cities throughout the United Kingdom. Also, I was wondering if you think that the style of policing, we need to move far more to intelligence-led policing.
Completely. But the core is intelligence-led policing.
Yeah.
Unfortunately, our structure of 43 police forces in Britain is not well equipped to deal with that. We tried to change that and didn't succeed. You haven't got enough resources in places like Greater Manchester and other forces throughout the country. They tend to be too concentrated in the Met, and you need them right throughout the country to be able to see what's going on. But I'm not one of those who criticises MI5 or the security services in relation to this case. Obviously, we'll need to examine what exactly happened and why they took the decisions they did, and I'm certain that analysis is already going ahead. But the core issue is creating a climate in which we can keep our civil liberties most effectively.
Thank you very much, Charles Clarke. Well, more details are emerging tonight about the man who caused carnage in Manchester, and specifically of what may have led him into the world of extremism. Newsnight has uncovered details of both Salman Abedi's family life in Libya and of his associates in South Manchester. Our correspondents, Gabriel Gatehouse and Richard Watson, are both here. First of all, Gabriel, what have you found out?
Well, there are two strands to this, Kirsty, as you say. There's the Manchester strand. I think Richard will talk about that. But in Libya, we're learning some interesting stuff about his background there. I've got three sources now who say that the bomber, Salman Abedi, and his father, Ramadan, both joined a militia that was fighting to topple Colonel Gaddafi in 2011. Now, Salman would have been 16 at the time. I've got three sources on this. Two of those are in Libya. One is a school friend from Manchester who I just got off the phone with, and he said because of his age, he's not sure how much frontline fighting he did, but he knows that he came before Tripoli fell. He then met him in Tripoli and said, amid the mood of elation, that's where they met up.
And of course, he was 16, he would have disappeared from school for a period of time.
What this school friend said was that, like many at the time, they went in their school holidays in the summer. They finished school, they broke up, they went out to Libya. Now, a bit of context here. It wasn't that unusual for British Libyans, even young British Libyans. I met some of them out there myself at the time, to go out and fight. 16, though, is pretty on the low end.
And what do we know about the militia with whom he was fighting?
Well, one of the sources that I've been speaking to said that he believes that this was the Tripoli Military Council. It was this brigade that was led by Abdel Hakim Belhaj, who was a former member of the Libyan Islamic Fighting Group, or LIFG. Now, this is a group that fought in Afghanistan alongside Al-Qaeda in the 1990s. It was banned under the Terrorism Act in the UK in 2005. But paradoxically, perhaps before that, some of their members had been given asylum in the UK as opponents to Gaddafi. And there are multiple suggestions now from sources in Manchester and in Libya that the bomber's father, Ramadan Abedi, was on the periphery, at least, of this group. Perhaps not a full member, but someone I've spoken to has said that he was associating with some of these ex-LIFG fighters when they came back from Afghanistan and were staying in Manchester. Now, Again, there's no suggestion here that that's necessarily there's anything illegal about that, but it gives you an indication of the kind of milieu that Salman Abedi was growing up with in a sort of atmosphere where armed resistance and jihad were common currency.
Now, Richard, turning to you, you have some information on IS recruiters in Britain and Salman Abedi's links to them.
Well, that's right. Salman Abedi lived just 10 minutes from the Hosti family. Now, Raphael Hosti was one of the most prolific recruiters for so-called Islamic State we've seen so far. He went out to fight for IS, so-called IS, in 2013. He was thought to be killed in a drone strike last year. But there's not a direct link. But I've been speaking tonight to researchers from the International Centre for the Study for Radicalisation, ICSR. And what they say, they've combed their database of jihadi communications, and they found a very interesting link. They found that Hosti's brother in Manchester was in contact with the Manchester bomber's brother. So there's a family link there.
What more do you know about Abedi's operations, as it were, in South Manchester?
Well, we know, of course, that he prayed at Disbury Mosque, and I was speaking to a source of mine tonight about that. He said he knew the Manchester bomber when he was a 12-year-old boy. His father took him to the mosque to pray. But crucially, he said that his nephew, my source's nephew, said that even when he was an older teenager, the Manchester bomber was developing some very supremacist and isolationist views. He was very aggressive against Shia Muslims, which is a classic sign of extremism. He was very critical of the environment that he was in. He claimed that he was already on the road to becoming a supremacist, isolationist, extremist, if you like, in those terms, in those days.
Thank you both very much indeed. Well, there were more raids and more arrests in Manchester today as the police continue their investigation into the suspected gang around Abedi. John Sweeney spent the day in the city and has this report.
South Manchester this morning, a possible suspicious package found at a local college not far from Old Trafford. The bomb squad have been called in, they've investigated. It's a false alarm. It's wrong to say this city is gripped with fear, but people are scared, with reason. The authorities believe that Abedi was a mule and not the bomb maker. Today, Greater Manchester Police sounded upbeat.
I want to reassure people that the arrests that we have made are significant, and initial searches of premises have revealed items that we believe are very important to the investigation.
But they don't appear to have found the bomb maker. Overnight and through today, more raids and more arrests across Greater Manchester, bringing the total number in custody to 8. All detainees men. The woman arrested yesterday has been released without charge. As well as the search for Abedi's accomplices in the bombing, there is the hunt for the people who radicalised him in the first place, who turned an ordinary Manchester lad into a mass murderer. In 2014, twins Salma and Zara Halani left their homes in Manchester to become Islamic State brides in Syria. Their father, who tried to rescue them from ISIS, worshipped here at the Al Furqan Mosque in South Manchester. Newsnight can reveal that Salman Abedi also used to worship here.
Hello, I'm from BBC Newsnight.
I tried to ask the men leaving afternoon prayers whether they knew the bomber.
Can I have a word?
We tried to talk to the imam at this mosque. He wasn't available. We did talk to an official off camera. I showed him a picture of Salman Abedi. He said he didn't recognise him, and that went for all of the worshippers we spoke to. They didn't know who he was, they'd never seen him, apart from one. He did recognise Salman Abedi. He'd said he'd been to the mosque on several occasions. That does not, of course, mean that anyone at the mosque knew what Abedi was planning. Our source, who didn't want to be filmed, told Newsnight that it was unbelievable that Abedi was the bomber, and questioned the evidence that he was. No such doubt at another mosque in South Manchester where Abedi used to pray.
The whole community is shocked, the whole Muslim community is shocked about it.
Earlier this year, the chairman of the mosque had a row with Abedi. over his disrespectful conduct.
So I was annoyed with him, and I shouted at him that he should not be having his shoes on there and he should know better, right? So at that time he said, don't treat me like a child. So I said, you are a child, because if you weren't, you would not behave in this manner. You would have taken your shoes off and have respect from, for the masjid, right? So he was angry about that. So I asked him, can you take your shoes off? And he did. And after that I said, can you please leave now? And he went.
There is a third mosque that Abedi attended, also in South Manchester, in Didsbury. Yesterday, mosque officials gave a press conference denouncing the atrocity. Today, a spokesman for the mosque told Newsnight that 2 years ago they gave the names of 3 worshippers who they feared were extremists, none of them Abedi, to the police, but they took no action. The 3, the spokesman said, are now under arrest. The man in the striped shirt is Mustafa Abdullah Graf, Imam at the Didsbury Mosque. Here is a Mustafa Abdullah Graf in the Arab Spring in 2011, in military fatigues with a group of fighters preparing to take on Colonel Gaddafi's forces. Newsnight asked the Didsbury Mosque whether Imam Graf had been a fighter. Their spokesman did not get back to us. Abedi's purpose in planting his bomb was to make Manchester disunited. He's failed in that, but the spotlight remains on the authorities who may not have listened hard enough to some in the Muslim community, and some people who knew Abedi and perhaps kept too quiet.
John Sweeney, well, the events of this week have raised a familiar question. What can the government do about people who seem to be attracted to violent extremism but haven't actually broken any laws? Our policy editor Chris Cook explains how government policy to counter radicalisation, called PREVENT, is designed to work.
Can we stop this from happening again? That's one of the biggest questions that will haunt government in the wake of the Manchester terror attack. Can we improve our counter-terror efforts? The government's counter-terror strategy, known as Contest, has 4 arms. They're called Pursue, which is capturing terrorists, Protect, which is defending ourselves, Prepare, which is getting ready for attacks, and the one where all the controversy is, Prevent. Stop people from becoming terrorists or supporting violent extremism. Britain's first ever National Security Advisor explains the purpose of PREVENT.
As it's evolved, it's become a programme to make sure that all those working in the public services, local authorities or in education, or in churches and mosques, have been trained to spot signs of radicalisation among vulnerable members of the public. And then they can refer people who they think may be at risk to a programme called Channel, where indeed people can come forward into the Channel programme themselves. And that is a separate programme which is a tailored package of support and help to people who might be in danger of being drawn into radicalisation for whatever reason.
According to the Home Office's last annual report, there were several thousand referrals to Channel. Around 15% of these were linked to far-right extremism and around 70% linked to Islamist-related extremism.
And one of the problems with the PREVENT programme from the outset, frankly, has been that because it comes from the government, because it's delivered through local authorities, it can look like the voice of authority. And for a number of vulnerable young people, they're going to reject that.
The statutory guidance is mindful of this problem. It states the PREVENT programme must not involve any covert activity against people or communities. But as the Mayor of Greater Manchester told Newsnight yesterday, PREVENT has a major reputational problem.
Like with Northern Ireland in the 1970s and 80s, some of the policies can lead to a whole cloud of suspicion hanging over a whole community, or that's how that community can feel. And PREVENT has begun to be seen in that way by some in the Muslim community.
It's probably not a policy that can stand still.
I do think we've got to keep refreshing the programme because fashions change. There's more radicalisation being done through the internet. Are we doing enough to tackle incitement to extremism on the internet? And as a new generation come forward, are we working through the role models that they look to? The footballers, the rappers, I don't know, the people who will seem cool to them.
The stakes in counter-extremism work are very high, but selling peaceful democracy to violent extremists is very tough, especially when it's the state doing the selling.
Chris Cook. Well, Amina Lone is the co-director of the Social Action Research Foundation, a think tank that works with marginalised groups, and a Labour councillor in Manchester. Kerry Bullivant is a spokesperson for CAGE, an advocacy organisation which says it campaigns to empower communities impacted by the war on terror, and which has been one of the most outspoken opponents of the PREVENT programme. Good evening to you both.
Good evening.
Amina Lone, I mean, you're from Manchester, and I wonder what fears people have, what people are asking you about in Manchester, and how this could have happened.
Firstly, let me say that I express my deep condolences to the families that suffered on Monday. People are in shock. People are scared across the board. People are scared about repercussions, but also about reactions as well. There's also fear that we may have more attacks. And what's the right approach going forward? You know, what do we do? These are innocent children. These were not people that were in any way on the front line or anything. They were going to a pop concert. It's an age of innocence. If you can target young children, then where's the limits?
But the world in which you work involves PREVENT. Do you think it works?
Absolutely. I think it does work. Like any government policy, it has its flaws. It's not perfect, and the implementation was tricky at times, but it has been continuously looked at and reversed. We're doing some phenomenal work in Manchester. We're doing this phenomenal work going on, I know, in Birmingham and the West Midlands.
And do you think there is that in your experience, people actually do trust PREVENT?
I think overwhelmingly people do that are ordinary Muslims. Yeah. I think there is a machine, a propaganda machine, which is very vocal and which is very anti-PREVENT for lots of different reasons, and that gets a lot of traction. And I think that is problematic, because actually when I talk about community groups that's getting funding to go and visit mosques, to go and visit gurdwaras, to go and visit temples, to go and visit churches, then how can that be seen as to talk about cohesion? That is a positive thing. And PREVENT is about safeguarding, it's about preventing young people who are at risk of radicalisation. How can that be a negative thing?
Kerry Bullivant, if you knew a young person who you feared, or even you had evidence that they were being radicalised or in danger of being radicalised, would you go to PREVENT?
I don't think that PREVENT is the right vehicle for doing this.
So you wouldn't do that?
What we need to do...
Hang on, just to be quite clear, can I just be quite clear? If you had evidence that a young person was in danger of radicalisation and in danger then of pursuing that route, you wouldn't go to PREVENT?
I think what we need to do is look at opening up the conversation and working on community-based approaches to de-radicalise these people and stop them from getting into these paths.
If you knew somebody, a young person, a teenager perhaps, who was being radicalised and was in danger of going abroad to pursue that or doing something here, who would you report it to?
I would take that if they were going to do a criminal act, then obviously you have to go to the police.
No, but if they were in danger of being radicalised, who would you go to?
If there was an issue with ideas like this, then they need to be taken into the community and dealt with.
I'm not clear about what you mean being taken into the community.
They need to be dealt with by the elders in the community, by imams, by the people who have a wide and solid, trusted understanding of the religion.
Is that being done?
No, I've got an issue with that, because actually it is the community that's implementing that. It's community groups. 460 mosques worked with...
What you seem to be suggesting is that the community is not part of your community. The community that Amina's in is not your community, and actually you feel alienated from that part of the community, so therefore you wouldn't be open.
I'm not saying that at all. Amina and I are part of the same community, and we share a lot of the same ideals, and we're all part of the greater British community, which are in mourning and shock at what's happened at the moment. We're not at different ends of the spectrum here.
But you don't believe in PREVENT?
PREVENT is based on pseudoscience, and the ERG22, which even the people who created it have said was not fit for purpose and was designed to be used by psychiatrists and not rolled out to 500,000 public sector workers.
If you are a lead, I wonder how you respond to this, because indeed if Kerry is active in the community and is suggesting to vulnerable people that PREVENT doesn't work.
I mean, there is an issue. I think there's an issue about a certain narrative and a certain gender being framed. But actually, I think there's a responsibility. What Prevent is trying to do is safeguard young people who are at risk of being radicalised by people in ISIS who want young people to go and blow themselves up in arenas like they did on Monday. That's what we're fighting against. And actually, it's a disservice to say that Prevent isn't working with people.
Is there an issue with denial among some Muslims?
Even the UN Special Rapporteur said that Prevent puts us at risk of stigmatisation, alienation,
Can I just say to you one fact? Prevent has stopped 150 vulnerable teenagers going to fight jihad. Isn't that a great thing?
That is a great thing that people aren't going, but that was completely able to be applied under old systems that we had.
No,
that could be done under safeguarding. That could be done under safeguarding.
I think that there is an issue of denial within the community, and it's understandable because people are feeling under threat, and they're feeling that they're being attacked. Muslims overall, majority of Muslims, up to 3 million Muslims in this country, ordinary Muslims, get on with life. They pay taxes, they live, they work, they play. However, people are scared of speaking out because they feel they're going to be vilified, and particularly women are vilified for speaking out about the problems in our communities, and there are significant issues.
Well, that's quite interesting, though, because what you're suggesting, particularly for women, is that women who speak out, or people that have been known to speak out, are vilified by people like you.
We don't vilify anybody, and we never have. What we do is we speak in the community about issues and things that have occurred. I myself have been a victim of accused pre-crime, which is the realm that Prevent deals in, and that led to 2 years of my life under house arrest, with no evidence being shown.
Do you think the imams should absolutely, categorically be charged with de-radicalisation?
All of our imams, and I think Amina would definitely agree with me on this, all of our imams around the country speak out against violence, speak out against...
I would disagree, actually. Unfortunately, I don't think it's all of them. I think there's an issue with the number of mosques. There's an issue with mosques, there's an issue with language, people don't necessarily speak English. There's an issue with women and space not being provided for women. I think that these are issues that are legitimate in our communities, and it's fair to say, look, we've got some problems, we've got to work together because these people are our enemies.
Do you think... I mean, we were talking, Lord Ricketts was just talking in the film there about the possibility that Prevent should be looked at again and so forth. Would you like to see an independent ombudsman perhaps just look at the work of Prevent and as it were, critique it?
I think there's no harm in having an independent review. I think that we should have more transparency. I think, but also I think what we should be doing is showcasing the positive work that it's done. It's done phenomenal work around the country, and I think that actually we have a responsibility. Myself, all the other practitioners, all of us, but Muslim or non-Muslim. This is not about Muslims. This is about people who hate us and our way of life. And we need to make sure we stand up and say, look, we're not, you do not represent us.
You talk about generally the community should sort this. What is your specific proposal if it's not Prevent? What's the specific thing that you think you should do?
Firstly, Prevent at the moment is based on the ERG22, which is
pseudoscience.
It
doesn't matter about that. Tell me what you specifically think should be done.
So what we need to do is stop clogging up the system with over 7,500 referrals a year, most of which are duds.
Clogging up the system. Surely they should be in the system to be checked.
What about the far-right extremism that Prevent deals with?
Please. Because this man was referred to the police over 5 different times and was missed, not picked up, because there's so many people getting referred, because what you've done is you've given 500,000 public servants a hammer and all they can see is nails.
I'm afraid I'm going to have to stop you both there. Thank you very much indeed. Tomorrow morning's front pages now. The Daily Telegraph, Corbyn, UK wars to blame for terror. The Sun, inside the bomb factory is their front page. For bomber planned for a year. Tory lead cut to 5 points as Corbyn closes in on May. And curb web giants that give terror a voice. Before we go, time to reflect. Today, across Britain, a minute's silence was observed to honour those who lost their lives or were injured in Monday's attack. So tonight, let's remember them. Good night.
Thank you.
Good evening. It's been the hottest day of the year so far. 28 degrees we had on Thursday. We'll probably beat that on Friday, especially across Highland Scotland. We could get 30 degrees. There could be a little bit of mist near the coast in the northeast, but basically it's sunshine for most of us all day. But there is the potential for